when do you want to start? Like now?
All right.
Now.
That's good.
Is that fine?
Yep.
I don't mind.
Recording. We're doing it live.
Hi everyone. Welcome to today's discussion of surveillance states and unethics of care. I am Izzy, your host for today, and I also go by Punky on WeChat, so you can call me whichever. We have Dr. Carwyn Morris with us today, and Carwyn holds a PhD in human geography from LSE, and he is studying as a researcher at University of Manchester this coming fall. His research interests include censorship, surveillance, migration, 低端人口, spatial informality, and China. You can also follow him on Twitter at Carwyn, which is Carwyn. Thanks for joining us, Carwyn.
Sure. That was a lovely introduction.
I try my best. I literally just copy everything you have on your Twitter profile. That's it.
So me and Izzy have known each other for many years.
You don't have to give out that much detail.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. I mean, I tend to overshare, so
Yeah, sure.
Let me share my screen. Is that coming through for you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. When do you want me to start?
Do you want to go over the structure of the talk before you get started? Maybe? Yeah. That would be nice.
Go overview.
Yeah. That's the structure overview thing. So yeah. Well, shall we start now then?
Yes, it's all yours. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. So I have no idea how long, I haven't really timed this talk. So the general idea is that we're going to do a bit of talking, me talking for 20 minutes. Then we'll have sort of a 5-minute break merging into some earlier, more general questions on things that might emerge in the first half of the lecture. And then after that, we're going to go into part 2 of the lecture, where I'm going to be giving some empirical examples of things that are how I have come to talk about what I'm talking about today. But they're my research interests, and they're what led me to talk about the things I'm discussing. But they're more as a starting point or a foundation for maybe another talk that we can have. After that, and depending on how many people are in the room, but we'll do breakout rooms where we'll be split into a few different rooms, and I will go between the rooms and also let the rooms sort of speak by themselves for 10 minutes or so to think through some of the things that we've talked about. But during that, we're gonna ask people to come up with like 2 questions. So we're gonna ask the group to come up with 2 questions, maybe 2 provocations, and 2 examples of surveillance in everyday life. And after they've done that in the breakout rooms, we're gonna come back together and we're gonna discuss things more broadly together, going off of what we talked about in the breakout rooms, but also maybe any other questions that people want, we can do them as well. Cool. So without further ado, we can start. So firstly, I'm not sure how much explicitly this will come up during this talk, but I'm going to give you my theoretical positioning so that you can help understand where I'm coming from. And there might be certain phrases I use, such as digital space, digital place, or I might move between physical and digital space quite interchangeably. That's because my theoretical framework and the way that I see what I'm going to be talking about is in a fluid physical, digital, spatial environment where there's physical space and digital space. So I consider how space is made, as I'm a geographer. I think about how territory is produced, how the nation state's territory is produced, how the local government's territory is produced, how borders are produced. And I think about that online and offline, physical and digital territory. Of course, everybody in China is familiar with the Great Firewall of China. That's a border for digital territory. Then I think about how I consider how spaces are produced and how places are produced. Places are where humans, and we can say non-humans, come together for social interaction, and people make places. Places are constantly changing. Places are based around the interactions that occur there. And my interpretation of a place might be different to your interpretation of a place. I consider hashtags, instant messaging groups, this Zoom meeting as places. And then in this framework, I think about spaces as being sites where place can be potentially made, where place is produced. And spaces are, for me, slightly more constructed often, a bit more controlled. Weixin, Zoom, Weibo, Twitter, Facebook, for me, they're all spaces. And within this, I understand that control, surveillance, all these things are built into space, be that physical space or digital space. So this is the way in which I'm seeing things. And if you know one of the great thinkers of contemporary China, Feng Binxing, he's had a shoe thrown at him in Wuhan before. He's written a book a few years ago called 网络空间的理论, or it's theories of cyberspace, basically. He's the principal engineer behind the Great Firewall of China. And he's theoretically responsible for a lot of the PRC's ideas on cyberspace. The governmental group that controls Weibo, Weixin, etc., is the Cyberspace Administration of China. China is advocating in the United Nations and at various levels for cyberspace sovereignty, cyberspace autonomy, things like this. So I really care what Feng Binxing says. I find it very interesting. And I think that we need to think through it in these spatial ways to consider how territory is made and to consider what the production of territory does to the internet and how the production of territory enables surveillance or governance. And we also need to think that Facebook, Twitter, Zoom right now, so Zoom's stock price went up this week or last week because they said that they were going to sort of disentangle from China and move services to America. I basically understand that as they're trying to disentangle themselves from China's digital territory and move themselves to the digital territory of the United States. And in this so-called digital Cold War that we're in, we have to remember that most of the services of the internet, that the majority of the internet users in the world use, are American. If the internet is a global village, it's a village in California somewhere. It's not a village anywhere else, really. Maybe occasionally it's in Boston or Austin as well. And there might be a distant cousin in Shenzhen, but yeah. So this theoretical position and this spatial position enables me to think about how controlling space enables technologies of surveillance to be built into environments. and enables one to make these technologies difficult to avoid. So, I mean, we might think that the Great Firewall is basically a way to force people nowadays to be visible to the government of China, because leaving the firewall means that the government no longer has access to that data and cannot practice surveillance. This results in citizens, actions, people, and material objects becoming legible to the state, the corporation, or even the public, although the public doesn't seem to have much power right now. And yeah, these spaces must be understood broadly. So by doing this, we're able to do a lot of things such as surveillance capitalism or repressive surveillance, things like that. So on to surveillance. Now, I consider surveillance as a practice, although I will move beyond this in a second. But a social practice includes actions, materialities, the things you're using for practices, and meanings, the reason you're doing something, the things that are driving you to do it, or the structures of thoughts and philosophy and ethics which are controlling the practice. I consider surveillance to be a practice that doesn't necessarily have negative meanings about it. So in 1980, Winner had this article, "Do Artifacts Have Politics?" Many people argue, no, artifacts, and here he's thinking about technology when he says artifacts, and he's specifically really thinking about the nuclear bomb. And do artifacts have politics? Many people argue no, though political qualities can be given to artifacts. So I'm wondering, does surveillance have politics? Now, Winner notes that certain technologies require specific social, cultural, and political formations to work. And that can affect people as well. And it can mean that those technologies are, whilst they might not have politics, they do force a certain way of action. And in 1999, Mackenzie and Vachman said that even if it's mistaken to see technologies as requiring particular patterns of social relations to go along with them, some technologies are, in given social circumstances, more compatible with some social relations than with others. In adopting technology, we may be opting for far more economically, politically, even culturally, as well as technically, than appears at first sight. So I guess they're sort of suggesting that when we start using certain technologies, we might be making a deal, or we might be chewing off more than we thought of. And this might push us down a certain path as the technology can influence our social, cultural, and political formations and economic formations. So we're wondering here, does surveillance have politics? So, thinking about surveillance, watching a camera feed, watching a video, watching this video now. So you have the action of watching, you have the camera screen and the camera, and then you have the thing attached to it, the meanings attached to it, the politics attached to it. So you might be thinking bad things, but securing property, that might be one of the meanings attached to it. You could be a security guard, or you could be the person making minimum wage at the 7-Eleven checkout, watching to see if something's stolen, because that stolen thing might be subtracted from their wages. You could be looking after life. You could be looking at the monitor of a screen that is surveying the human body in a hospital. You could be having fun. You could be watching your cat cam when you're on holiday, making sure that your cats are okay, and shouting weird words out to the cats to make them play with you. These are all building on the same actions and materialities, but they're engaging in different things through different meanings and politics. You're not trying to catch your cat doing something evil so you can discipline your cat when you come home and arrest your cat. You want to have fun with your cat. Gratification, sex cams, cam boys and cam girls, porn, masturbation. It can be for that, and it can be for gaining money through this as well. Parenting, baby cams. When you're watching your baby, you might have a camera in the room that enables you to see what's going on. One issue is that many of these Internet of Things technologies have very bad security, and they can be hacked into, and people can watch your baby too. So these materialities and actions can be circumvented and subverted for different meanings. In digital sites, passing text on social media is an action. It's done by algorithm servers through databases. What are the meanings associated with that? Stopping hate speech, stopping racist speech. You might do that, and a further action might be deleting that speech. Making profit, surveillance capitalism. By parsing text or parsing actions, you are able to bring a vast quantity of those actions together, then sell them for profit at different ways. And you might try and find new ways to pass this information, to find new information through new forms of surveillance to make more money. Reducing fake news, rumors, or 网络谣言, things like that. They're also things, one of the reasons you might talk about this, but all of these things can have different after effects. Right now, many liberal politicians are talking about how to stop fake news. Twitter is censoring Donald Trump for posting fake news. The act of posting fake news and censoring Donald Trump is not too dissimilar from a shadow ban that could occur on Twitter or YouTube at the same time, and that could be malicious. Or it's not too dissimilar from when my posts are censored on Weixin or Weibo. These are the same technologies. So where we are now, surveillance is part of social practices. Surveillance can be considered a social practice in itself, though I would argue it is more interesting when we consider it as a part of other social practices. It is enabled by material elements. I would argue, and I'm happy to hear something else from you, it is not negative, that it can be positive, but there are numerous meanings or politics that can be attached to surveillance, and it matters how those meanings are attached. The power relations in the production of meaning and the power relations in politics matter here, more maybe than the technology itself. Although I'd like to know if anybody feels that this technology surveillance, this practice, is inherently bad. If so, I'm happy to go with that, because I'm still wondering that too. Do you feel comfortable when people watch you? That's maybe a lot of people feel uncomfortable with that. Okay, now we're extending this a bit further. So surveillance, and we're going to the example I just used. Surveillance of parsing text, deleting found text. Oh, I forgot to change something there, but using servers and algorithms to do this in coded environments. It's the same thing in both moderation and censorship. All that's different is the meaning. And even when we talk about this, Donald Trump is telling people to vote illegally. Those posts are deleted. Li Wenliang is saying on Weixin about a SARS-like disease. That is censored, and images about that are censored. So we have moderation and censorship. they are using the same actions and the same materialities, but they're occurring with different meaning. Removing news about evictions, deleting Zhou Baosong's Weibo account, censorship, removing posts that incite violence against minorities, moderation maybe. So I would say that surveillance is at the heart of both censorship and moderation, but it's when the different politics and meanings become intertwined that it changes. And we need to think how that happens, why it happens, and how we can stop it occurring negatively. So, surveillance imaginaries. What we're getting to here is, how do we imagine surveillance? Surveillance imaginaries, David Leon argues, provide a sense of what living with surveillance entails. And surveillance imaginaries can sort of build up shared understandings about what surveillance does, how it is done, what is and is not surveillance. Surveillance imaginaries change. When I first watched Westworld in, I think, 2015, when they realized that actually it was all to gather data, a lot of people were like, wow, that's amazing. I never fucking thought of that. 5 years on, I watched Westworld season 3, which was really bad, but then it was still, they're trying to gather data to do things, and data's the big thing. And we're all like, we know that. That's changed. We've also seen Black Mirror, how we understand surveillance, what impacts our understanding of surveillance is constantly changing. So I'm very interested in the evolving surveillance imaginaries. This talk is a part of evolving surveillance imaginaries. I'm interested to know what your surveillance imaginaries are. So surveillance imaginaries influence how people, including legislators, surveyors, those surveyed, imagine what surveillance is and its uses. Technologies capable of surveillance can be imagined in multiple ways. When thought of positively, people rarely call them surveillance. They often become surveillance when they're thought of negatively. So, what is the affect of surveillance? How does it feel to be seen? Do you feel uncomfortable, Punky? You are in my screen right now and I'm watching you. I'm not watching anybody else in this chat. Do you feel uncomfortable knowing that I've been looking at you nonstop for the last 20 minutes? Does that change now that I've told you? Or did you feel uncomfortable being seen by me before? In a classroom, this is a form of surveillance. I don't know if this is considered surveillance now, but it's the same practice.
Well,
yeah?
If I turn on the video, I gave my consent.
Okay, so consent is an interesting and important thing here.
Yes.
So we'll get to this Q&A in like 2 minutes, I hope. So, but I do want everyone here to think about how they feel being seen, or how they feel being a piece of data, a data ghost, how they feel with their data being done. How do you feel being smelt? If somebody could smell you and sort of smell you around and know where you've been, does that make you feel anxious? In a study in 2015 on university students in New Zealand, many of them said they feel so anxious about surveillance. They feel they have no control over surveillance. They feel they cannot avoid surveillance now, and they are given to accepting it. How does that make people feel? You've lost the democratic capacity to influence the technologies around you. Is surveillance undemocratic, as it is almost often unidirectional? But as Punky just said, she can maybe turn the video off and I can no longer survey her. So what are the politics involved in this? And what happens when we start thinking about our feelings and affect too? So just some things over the last few years. Facebook has gone from being social media to surveillance capitalism. Fitbit or the Mi Band has gone from being healthy tech to tracking tech, where military officials are worried that their secret military bases can be found by people wearing health tech. Zoom went from video conferencing to political censorship. But the key with it was you need to know what to censor. You needed to know which room to close. And to do that, you needed surveillance. Smart cities go from being the future of urban life to being the future of data extraction. But there's also a desire to be surveilled. On Twitter, people want management of fake news. To manage fake news, you need to find fake news. You need to see it. Surveillance is necessary. COVID-19, everyone in the UK is bemoaning track and trace. We don't have it. They want surveillance. Google search, tracking search data to find emerging epidemics and disease hotspots, that is desired because it is helping people. So for the next, so now what I want to do, we're gonna come out of lecture mode for like up to 10 minutes, I guess, or longer. I'm also gonna get some water in a second, but I'm interested to take any questions on anything we've talked about so far, or more broader, like general meta ideas about surveillance. Do you think that surveillance is neutral? Does surveillance have politics? What are the meanings behind surveillance? What social practices is surveillance part of that it is not commonly imagined to be part of? Can you think of any relationships between space and surveillance? What does being surveilled feel like? Are these feelings changing? What other changes in surveillance imaginaries have there been? And how does surveillance imaginaries differ across space, time, race, class, and generation? Finally, who is watching? States, corporations, or others? Do you feel safer when it's your mother watching you than you do when it's Facebook watching you? That might differ if you're 35 years old versus 4 years old, but yeah. So let's stop sharing now and have a quick chat. Discipline is my cat. I want to discipline my cat. So I'm going to go and get water a second, and I'd be interested to know if anybody has any questions. You can feel free to turn your video on or use voice chat or raise your hands to do the questions, okay? And I'll be back in 1 minute.
That's good. Thanks, Carwyn.
Thanks. And everybody can just use that raise hand, and I will monitor and figure out an order, basically.
Sounds good.
Already forgot about the questions. You should have left that screen sharing.
No worries, but at least in terms of talking points, we can talk about how surveillance. Oh, there you go. He's. Would you mind moving to the? There you go. The talking points. So, the one I definitely am interested.
Hello?
Adrian, I think you're muted.
Oh, that was weird because like usually I hold spacebar in order to unmute myself, but anyways, which is just saying, I'm very interested to hear from everybody about what social practices is surveillance a part of, especially coming from like a biological perspective, because we can take the example of prairie dogs using surveillance as a way of defending themselves, as they have a sentinel to pretty much look around and make sure that there's no predators around.
Yeah, So this is where I'm sort of interested, but one thing I'm sort of I think there's a worry also in what I'm talking about, which is extending surveillance too far and maybe resulting in it losing analytical clarity. But I don't think that's necessarily happening. So I would say it's interesting to think beyond vision, beyond eyes. Mm-hmm. And this is essential for algorithmic data anyway, although many people end up interpreting the results of algorithmic surveillance or surveillance capitalism through their eyes as well. But moving beyond this is an interesting sort of point.
Agreed.
But when you were saying biological surveillance, what other things are you thinking about, Adrian?
So it's mainly pretty much using surveillance as a mechanism of defense for a society or a societal species. Because by nature we are always pretty much aware of our environment, and surveillance is like taking it from a natural perspective. It's just kind of like an enhanced version of that. But pretty much, I guess the better question on that is, where as we as humans do we pretty much draw the line between doing that for pretty much our primal instincts of defending ourselves to pretty much having that issue of is surveillance too much, or are we doing that beyond just our basic need to feel comfort or feeling that we are safe?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, but I think we're also starting to get to this idea about the politics of surveillance as well. If surveillance is inherently good
a
or
bit
bad.
of a loaded question, but at least there.
It's fine. I love loaded things, except guns. I'm not a fan of loaded guns. The position is sort of saying there, though, that surveillance is natural, and I guess it is. But you're also suggesting that securitization is natural, and security is natural, and that's perhaps true. We've always been trying to secure or engage in forms of security. So would you say then that surveillance is inherently linked to modes of securitization, Adrian?
Yeah, that is definitely a very good question, because when it comes to generalizing surveillance, I don't think that everything that has to do with surveillance goes into that category, because security is definitely a physiological need that us as humans have. But as far as getting to the point of us having to trust someone else to pretty much look around and track information and what have you, that's where it gets kind of great. Because individual, at least in terms of individual surveillance, I think that definitely does go into that sense of security. So, for instance, people who pretty much buy ring alarms or those cameras that they put in their doorbells and such, that is a type of surveillance, but that's pretty much more on the individual level, where they know who's pretty much lurking around their neighborhood and what have you, versus pretty much having an entire system doing that for them, even if they don't know that they're being watched.
So going again onto issues of consent.
Yes.
Although whose consent is interesting.
I really love that.
Sorry, we have a few people in the chat raising their hands.
Yeah,
Emily, Olivia, and James in that order. So go ahead, Emily.
Hey, thank you for the really interesting presentation. So I was thinking about the question of like the survey, the watched party being anonymous or named. I feel like that makes a really big difference in how I would feel. Like, for example, a lot of tech companies make a point that all the data they collected is anonymous and that it's supposed to make people feel a lot better about being watched. So I was just wondering, like, is it still surveillance when the data is anonymized, and why do we feel so different? And like, is there a qualitative difference between like individual surveillance versus when you cannot be named, you're just part of a group?
So I would wonder, Emily, if you feel it's different. I mean, I will say more, but I'm wondering if you feel it's different when you are an anonymous piece of data or not. But I guess some of this goes to issues of trust. Do we trust that the surveying institution will anonymize everything and has truly anonymized everything? Or do we believe that our data ghosts or our data trails can still be found? But I think even beyond that, this form of surveillance gets us towards those ideas of maybe surveillance capitalism or something like that, where we are now a part of training algorithms and systems that are making profit for other people. And do we want to be remembered even if do we want to exist and continue to exist in those forms even if it is anonymously? Or as technology improves, how can we make sure things are anonymous in the future? I guess there's an ethical thing about anonymity here, which is we can never be sure that we will be anonymous as technology improves.
I think these are really great points, and I feel like trust is definitely the main piece of important factor here. And I feel like though it still feels qualitatively different being surveyed by a piece of algorithm versus being surveyed by a real person. And I wonder like why we feel that way, and if it's a common feeling, like, or is it just my feeling?
Then let's discuss this. So could you write that question in the chat in a second, and we'll use that for the group chats a bit later as a way to continue to think through this. Okay. Is it
It's my turn?
Or James?
Hi, yeah. Hi.
Actually, Olivia is before you. Sorry.
Okay, cool.
Sure.
I am policing the whole.
I like it. I love policing.
Go ahead, Olivia.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, just about. Could you speak a bit louder?
Huh. Yes, is it better now?
Yeah, I'll just sit really close.
Weird. Okay, cool. Thanks for the presentation. I think the previous question is pretty interesting as well. I think there are like two pieces. As someone who's working in a tech company collecting data, I think there are definitely two pieces to like the question that was just asked. There's one piece where it's like, do I know that I'm being surveilled? Like, is someone watching and controlling what I'm doing? And then there's a second piece of like, if my data is being collected, then there's like an implicit kind of exchange of data and profit. And I think a lot of the anxiety of today comes from, as a consumer, you don't really know what value your piece of data is bringing and whether you're getting sufficiently even like paid for like this exchange. So like, I don't know, I feel like at some point that question becomes one of, capitalism as well, in addition to surveillance. But my original question that I wanted to ask is, this is a very, very interesting group to discuss surveillance. And I think, I believe you as a scholar also like worked both in the West and in China. And I think there is, at least from my understanding, there's a pretty interesting difference between how people view surveillance in like specifically China versus the US. And that really ties into like the first question that you ask here is whether surveillance is a neutral action. And I think people, like the larger population, would give a pretty different opinion on that in China and in the US. As in, I feel like there's a lot more positivity towards, for example, mass surveillance in exchange for security, in exchange for example, COVID tracking, like that's also security and protection in China. And I was just wondering, like, where do you think that difference mainly stem from? Is it like cultural inferences? Is it trusting the government? And if there's such a big difference in how people view surveillance in different countries, then I think that might implicitly mean that surveillance can't be defined as positive or negative just by itself. So I guess, so in summary, my question, I guess, is what do you think people's attitude towards surveillance is influenced by?
Yeah, I think all of your points there are very interesting and worth discussing in a bit. At the end of the thing, when we have a bit more time to go deep down. So I would say that if I was thinking of the broader question you asked at the end there about why we're seeing different, let's use the phrase surveillance imaginaries again. Why are we seeing different surveillance imaginaries in different sites, in different countries? There's anthropological work looking at this and discussing trust more broadly. In China, somebody like Yan Yunxiang, who's at UCLA, he's done a lot about trust in China. I guess maybe this is actually one of the things that I'm going to be doing in the research project I'm starting up soon, to ask these sorts of questions. I think the anthropological side of it so far might argue that there has been perhaps a breakdown of structures which can have trust, which can build a trustworthy society. And with a dearth of these, people are looking for something to trust. They're looking for structures which can bring regularity and security into society and into life, if they don't see them there. So this isn't necessary. This is all a imagination question. How is society imagined? So some of the research on social credit systems that's being done right now, sorry if you can't hear me clearly, the cats are being fed. Some of the research on social credit systems at the moment says that a lot of people want social credit systems. And two of the things that they say are, it will give us a system of credit that is similar to that which they have in the West. So that is one understanding of what's happening in Chinese society and with credit there, but also credit elsewhere and the influence of credit. The other is they understand this technology, which is in a sense a surveillance technology with things being done to the data. They understand this technology as one that will produce a more ethical society because it will target people who do wrong. So I guess with this as a background, people think that there is a lack of things to trust within society, and thus We need, maybe this might be a solution to helping a society that is full of corruption, and the amount of corruption there is maybe leads to that. Other research has been done on places like Scandinavia or in more equal societies, and in more equal societies, research shows that people are less, they have less desire to show themselves off as being unique or different. Maybe if we extended this to think through what's going on in societies where surveillance is desired, people might see the inequality and fear the inequality, and that might drive them to want equaling measures or something like that. Sorry, I haven't said that properly, but inequality, broader economic inequality might have an effect on this as well. We can talk about that again in a bit. Shall we do James and Flower, then continue to the next part of the talk?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure, thanks. So my concern is people who support surveillance claim that it can bring more secure for people, but I think this is a trade-off between privacy and the secure. It depends on how much privacy you want to give up to get more secure. So people in China, then they do care their privacy, but some city-run company like Baidu, Li Yanhong said Chinese people doesn't care much about privacy to buy more convenience, but I don't think that's true. So when people get some transaction using the mobile payment, the government know everything you do. One day when you book a hotel or you went somewhere, when you have some not cash, the mobile payment, the government know everything about you. So I think the surveillance is back of the surveillance is the power, it's the state. So it's not a net neutral transaction. So this power need to be limited by law. Otherwise, real life will become the dystopia story like 1984 or the Black Mirror. You everywhere, but other people know everything about you. That is a good thing for the civil society. I think the baseline is the bottom line is this surveillance cannot violate human rights. Otherwise, the people don't have any privacy, and the government can censor anything they want. They can do a 24/7 surveillance for every people's movement. That could be terrible. That's my concern.
Yeah, I think that's a valid concern. I guess it's about, I mean, the limitations and how that is legally enacted, yes, and how far we trust legal systems to do what they say they're going to do.
Right.
And how easily can those legal systems be manipulated to either be completely worked around or to just be ignored. And so again, I think this surveillance issue is about the imagination of society more broadly. It's less about surveillance. Surveillance becomes a technology or an object through which people are interpreting their other misgivings about society. And then, yeah, that's one part of it. But then when we have a hyper-capitalist neoliberal situation like in America, surveillance goes to reproduce those inequalities that are already existing in society.
Yes. Even in US, the government also has the power to censor people's email or some online action through some law by the cause of anti-terrorism or something like that. So this power also need to be limited. Otherwise, people don't have human rights.
Yeah, I agree. We can again pick this up in a bit. And Flower?
Oh, hi. So I guess what I'm thinking is like it's really interesting that you mentioned about geography and space, and that makes me to wonder the sort of like I don't know if it's intersection or surveillance, or I mean the consequence of surveillance, or like in your words like the meaning or the action. So maybe surveillance is also, it's like a tool, and then it's a mean to an end. And then what is the end? I mean, sorry, I guess I'm maybe rumbling, but I feel like, so when you say space, there's another thing is that what's happening outside or externally, it will impact inside. So it seems like it's just surveillance of things outside, like the words you say, the text you type online, and like what movements you do. But then internally, there's another surveillance going on. I feel like it forces you to censorship yourself. Like what should you think? What's the correct thinking? What's the politically correct thinking, or what's the right way to think? Like, so that's also, you say, so it's a space change. It goes from externally and comes internally, and then maybe that's more to do with freedom of speech.
Yeah, I will touch on this point again in a bit. I think it is, and you're talking about internals and externals here as well. We can think about where is visibility occurring? Where can things be seen? And I guess one of the things that my interlocutors, my 研究对象, sort of say to me is that some of them have said to me that they censor their thought before they even say the words now. They're pre-censoring themselves when they want to say something particularly problematic. So this is what I think the political, cultural consequences of surveillance are. It can be the internalization of surveillance structures, or the internalization of the fear of being seen, which seems to spread to make one fearful of the actions at any moment, even when they cannot be seen.
Right.
So I guess what a good surveillance system does is to flatten space. So you talked about different scales. You talked about internally in the body, the room, the town, city, the state, the group, anything like that. An effective surveillance system would flatten space and make it so one feels that they are never out of sight, and they internalize those structures and those scales, I guess. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
But we're gonna touch on some of these things in the second half of the talk. So should we go to that now?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Cool.
Go on.
Okay. So yeah, that was supposed to be a shorter thing than it was. But why don't we use some of the things that we've talked about and some of the things in the chat in the group discussion, or the broader discussion we'll be doing in a bit. So I'm just going to go through 2 quick case studies to think about surveillance. The first one is what my PhD field work was about, which was Beijing in 2017 and the 低端人口, the eviction of the low-end population. So when we think about surveillance, yeah, I guess most people tend to now immediately jump to surveillance, high-tech surveillance. So there's a reward system in place for reporting illegal construction, although urban grid management information systems, satellite remote sensing monitoring, e-government network, urban basic geographic information system, and other technical means and information resources are used to find illegal constructions. So when I'm talking about illegal construction, I'm talking about 违法建设, and I'm thinking about restaurants and things like this. And the part there from urban grid, yada yada, to resources in quotation marks, is from one of Beijing government laws and regulations. So the regulations talk about all of these forms of e-government, high-tech monitoring, GIS, etc. But the first one is urban grid management systems, which is basically people. So there are advanced surveillance technologies being used, yeah, but the main surveillance technology is still people. And this, I will sort of suggest in a bit, is something we need to remember when we're being paranoid about surveillance still. So I think about the chengguan as technologies of surveillance. And when we're thinking about these things, we might want to think where, so if the chengguan are surveillance technologies, or the, what's it called? The chaoyang chunzhong, things like that, are surveillance technologies spread throughout a network. We might want to think where their visibility and what can they surveil. So in my research with food workers, people like doing a liang pi par, stuff like that, their surveillance of the chengguan was from the street. If my research interlocutors could leave the street, they were often able to avoid the street-centered gaze of the chengguan. Similarly, if they were able to leave the street, so we're talking about the chengguan as the people who are enforcing restaurant codes and things like that, and informal food businesses in Beijing and elsewhere. If people leave the street and instead use Weixin or Dadongdianping or other digital spaces to advertise their food businesses, they're able to work around the street-centered gaze of the chengguan. So here I want to say that surveillance always has a position, and it's always positioned, and its spatial positioning means that we can work around it in different ways. So we're going to be talking a little bit now about the demolitions in Beijing in 2017. So for those who don't know, at the end of 2017 in November, there was a fire in Xindiancun in Daxing district of Beijing. It killed 19 people officially, and 17 of those people held non-local hukou, so they were not from Beijing. The effect of this death in a gongyu, which was technically a 违法建设, but it was an accepted form of 违法建设, of illegal construction, was the mass demolition and eviction of people all across Beijing. And at this time, it's believed that tens of thousands of people were evicted from their homes or their businesses in November and December 2017. So one of the things that happened in response to this was a project to get a map of those people who were evicted. And this is to create a memory of what happened. So they wanted to do that. In a sense, they were engaging in surveillance. They were going around keeping an eye on the actions of the state, which were being censored in the media. They were being censored in journalistic media, and there were censorship notices given to media rooms to not publish more stories about the eviction. What happened here was, well, this is a long image for the project. What happened here was, over the course of a few weeks, a large group of networked people came together engaging in contentious activity. The main one is Beijing Surgery. They're the people who were making the map. Now, Beijing surgery started as a hashtag, and it was censored as a hashtag within 24 hours. But on the long image here, as you can see on the bottom right, there was a QR code. The QR code led to Weixin groups. And once this project was censored on Weibo, they moved to Weixin. Now, there's a few things going on here. Firstly, this code, the QR code to take us from Weibo to Weixin, from image to Weixin, was visible to the censors. So this thing was visible through surveillance, and the Weixin group could have easily be found, but it wasn't. It wasn't censored. So even though the Weixin, the Weibo hashtag was censored, Weibo posts were censored, and the image was entered into a censorship database, the Weixin groups continued throughout this period. And after this, so this tells us that there are fragmentation in the surveillance and censorship apparatus. High-tech surveillance doesn't really do everything, and things can easily break through the high-tech surveillance system if you can use language correctly, or if you can hide things in ways that make sense to humans but do not make sense to the surveillance technologies that are doing the surveillance and censorship. So instead of thinking about, we sometimes think that sensorial or surveillance systems are very powerful and can see everything. And this goes back to the question just now from Flower that, yeah, people feel like it's everywhere. Well, it is everywhere, but it can be broken, and it doesn't work very well all of the time. And thus, there is always space for new things to emerge. There's always space for resistance, or there's always space for different new spaces of gathering and political solidarity to emerge, even within the surveillance system, because the surveillance system struggles to understand. The human censor or the human surveyor can only see a little bit of information, but it can understand that information quite well. The algorithmic surveillance system can see a lot of information. The system is designed. So here we go to space again. Systems are designed so the algorithmic surveillance systems must see the data. But even then, these groups and these contentious hashtags can survive because there's a lack of understanding within these things. So, but we go into surveillance anxieties. So within the Weixin group, so Beijing surgery started as a hashtag, and then it moved to a Weixin group. And in the Weixin group, they continued to do the mapping project to map where evictions had occurred in Beijing. Tensions arose in the Weixin group because people were scared. They were fearful of their own safety. They were fearful of the safety of the project, and they were fearful of the safety of the group leader. Within the group, people were saying things like, I recommend you stop this discussion. Respect the goals of this group and the safety requests. The environment is as it is, meaning it's dangerous. And if the group is not around anymore, the objectives will never be met. So people were internalizing the fear of surveillance, and then within the groups, because they feared surveillance, they were moderating the groups themselves and moderating their own behavior. Everybody should really consider using Telegram, but maybe I'm overthinking things. No, Telegram and WhatsApp are both good to use. If you can use it. Using it would be smart. This is because of encryption. This is also because servers are not within the People's Republic of China. So they are outside of China's digital territory, and these servers are more difficult to survey, and the people using the equipment, the software, are more difficult to survey because of encryption. And then in the middle, everyone pay attention. Don't share the map outside of the group. We don't want eyes of the state fixed on you. If not, all our effort will be completely wasted. There's a fear that even sharing the map outside of the group at all will lead to it being seen by the state, and then the project ending, people being arrested, etc., etc. So there is a strong fear of surveillance within what people are doing. Here, we might want to talk about censorship, but I think these comments and other comments which I didn't post in these shots, there's a greater fear of being seen than a fear of being surveyed. I mean, there's a greater fear of being seen than a fear of being censored. Everybody expects censorship to happen, but there's a greater fear that the things that they're doing will be seen and identified as illegal, and then that will cause problems. So when a lot of people in the group were talking about doing political protests or political action, the group leader said, everybody please pay attention for a second. Right now, the media has received another very stern censorship order, and we're still gathering and organizing data. And we're in contact with a number of channels that can publicly share our final output. We've also asked those in the media who have more experience what they should do, and they say that it's very serious. So please, everybody, treat this issue very seriously. As of now, the data we have gathered, we don't want it publicly shared. And we ask that everybody stop sharing that map. Let me reiterate, as the group leader, I have responsibility for the conduct of everyone in the group. So if anybody continues to discuss ideas about collective action, I must disband the group. In order to ensure our own safety and in order for us to be able to release a final output, could everyone please cooperate? So there's a continued fear of being seen. We could talk about censorship of the group, but from discussions with people involved, the greater fear was that all of the data would be deleted and people would be arrested for what they were doing. And even if there is a fear of censorship, that fear of censorship is built on a fear of surveillance. So there's an increasing fear that everything can be seen. People fear an end to safety. Safety is compromised through surveillance. Surveillance technologies make text legible. They can understand imagery through optical character recognition, and they can transcribe sound. It makes so one must constantly discipline themselves. The fear is of an omnipotent state apparatus. But as I said, the existence of the group shows problems. Sina and Tencent don't communicate. People should be anxious of state and state-associated actors. That's true. And in Beijing surgery, people were interrogated. But this began because of surveillance by village police. Police in a Changzhongcun. It wasn't because of advanced surveillance technologies online and the state going into Weixin and seeing what was happening because of a hot topic emerging. It was because of traditional policing in a village. So after this, there was tracing. This led to members of the project being interrogated. And this was bad, but it's not high tech. It's happening in other ways. There is a repressive environment that should be feared, but is it because of the political environment and fear of viral politics? Or is it because of surveillance in general? So here we need to be careful of techno-determinism. Just because there is advanced surveillance technology, it doesn't mean that that advanced surveillance technology can be used to stop everything. In fact, it might be very basic technology, the village police officer. So in the end, maps were made, And I think we can think of this as two-way surveillance. This was a civil society group surveying the state. They used the GPS functions of their phone to send the location of where evictions were happening. They used the phone function of the camera function to take pictures of surveillance notices. And these were collected to create maps about what had happened and to understand how many people were evicted. Okay, so just as we finish, I'm quickly going to talk about another issue, which is COVID-19 and viral politics. So there was surveillance and censorship during COVID-19. We're all very aware of that. This is from GitHub. It's one of the GitHub memory projects where people were gathering examples of censored media reports, of censored posts and things like that, and storing them on GitHub as a memory archive. So people knew this was going, and people were fighting against it to try and create a memory of what had been censored and what had happened, fearing that it wouldn't work in the future. There were also other ways to work around censorship. So here we go to the idea once more that censored material must be seen and understood. If we as people can think of ways to make our products, our produce, our artifacts illegible to the surveillance apparatus, but legible to humans, then we can continue to work within surveillance-heavy sensorial environments. This is the IFEN article and the numerous ways in which the IFEN article was turned into different things that couldn't be understood by the set surveillance system and thus couldn't easily be censored. But so I would like to argue that in the end of March, perhaps, and this is what some other people have said, there was a potential Chernobyl moment where people thought that this could really lead to proper change or political change. You had some people saying this will bring down the Chinese government. Now, I think there was space for change here. And it was interesting, when violent governance is impossible to rationalize away and the illusion of care is shattered, spaces for counter movements emerge, which in turn prompted the authorities to detain those involved in these projects. So when I'm talking about illusion of care, I'm thinking about how Li Wenliang was detained for spreading a rumor, a 网络谣言. So the rumor, for some people still trusted that rumor was actually fake news rumor, bad for society. And thus they could accept surveillance and accept censorship when it was bad rumors being targeted. I think the first rumor that I really think about was in 2011 after the nuclear power plant problems in Japan. And there was the rumor circulating online in China that if you eat enough salt, it will protect you from the radiation. So that was a rumor, and the person who gave that rumor, spread that rumor, was arrested and fined. So I think for many people, the fear of fake news and the rumor maybe started somewhat around 2011, and using these reference points, they were okay with people being arrested or fined because of spreading rumors. But Li Wenliang destroyed this because he was trying to tell people about a deadly virus and he was accused of spreading a rumor. This could have important political or cultural effects in the future as the rumor is might become less effective. But as I said, a space emerged, but it wasn't filled with people who could create maybe civil society positive political change, partly because many of those people were arrested. or they were already under house arrest, or they were already so fearful of what could happen that they didn't do anything, or as happened in 2017 with the Diduan Renko, they feel that there's no chance that any true change can emerge, so they don't want to do anything. That was some of my interlocutors in 2017. Other former activists told them, don't bother doing anything. You can't make change. You'll be censored right away. And the people who told this to them actually unfriended them because they didn't want to be implicated in the same contentious political activity as them. So there is a fear that breaks apart relationships too. So ethical surveillance. I would like to maybe consider what happened after March is that the space for change that was filled with ethical surveillance, surveillance that was saving lives, track and trace systems that were stopping the disease, ways to save you. And even if the health QR scanning codes weren't doing very much, people felt like they were being seen. Many people may begin to feel cared for through surveillance. This became very bodily surveillance, and it made people aware that the government and corporations were concerned for them. I was listening to Gusha FM. I'm sure many of you listen to Gusha FM sometimes. There was an episode from someone studying in Scotland, and she said, so in England and Scotland at the time, the Prime Minister was talking about herd immunity. She was like, herd immunity, this guy is crazy. I do not want to live under a regime of herd immunity. And that's when I knew it was time to go back to China. And I'm fine going into quarantine for 2 weeks, as long as there is care and as long as we're following scientific advice. So people would escape the crazy regime of herd immunity for a regime of surveillance that they could feel on their body and feel like it was doing something. So I'm just saying here. So when we go to now, the question becomes, has the fact that repressive surveillance caused harm been forgotten? Or is it temporarily out of people's minds and it might return? Or it might have long-term effects. For instance, the rumor is no longer an effective political strategy. This is also interesting because earlier I said that often when something becomes known as surveillance, people no longer like it. But when it's social media, it's okay. When it becomes surveillance capitalism, it's not okay. So here, this was surveillance as surveillance. So why, with surveillance as surveillance okay now, this might, with surveillance saving lives, with surveillance no longer hidden, how will this affect future surveillance? How will this affect how people understand surveillance capitalism or surveillance governance? Wang Xinyuan at UCL is talking about social credit. She's saying people want the social credit system because it's ethical. They see it as having an ethics of surveillance in there, ethical surveillance. They think it's stopping bad people through this gaze and not stopping them, and thus they want it to make their lives better. So will life-saving surveillance result in an increase and further normalization of surveillance? What are the cultural, social, economic, and political effects of surveillance, particularly after what has happened with COVID-19, where surveillance is shown to be saving lives? If it is saving lives, and how important surveillance is there, is up for debate. But many people feel that surveillance is saving lives. The surveillance imaginary is changing. So how does this influence the future? What are the boundaries of surveillance and where is surveillance heading? And I think here over the last 9 months, we've seen the intensification of a smart city approach, or a data everywhere approach, where you provide data every time you walk through a door, which is built into broader systems. The datafication of everything is emerging. This means surveillance. How do we think about this? How do we do this ethically? How is consent involved in this? Okay, so we can stop there and engage in discussion about this. Cool. I'll leave this page open for now.
Yeah, please. If you have questions, feel free to use the hand raise feature so I can see you.
Yeah, or so actually, we've got 20 people here. I think it would be good to do what we were going to do and split people into 2 or 3 groups so that they can engage in some discussions first, and then we can come together.
So you said 2 groups? No.
Yeah, do you think 2 groups is okay?
Probably, or even 3.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to split people automatically into 3 groups. I'm going to put some text in the chat, which I'll share some text with people, some of the questions, but I'm interested in people in these groups to start having a discussion together about some of the things that we've talked about. The limits of surveillance, how ethical surveillance can occur. Do we want ethical surveillance or not? Is surveillance a neutral technology, or is there an inherent politics to surveillance that we cannot work around or avoid? We're going to go into groups for 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll come back together for a larger final discussion as a group of people. Okay, so I'm going to create the rooms now.
Hey. What's up?
Hello.
Hey,
What do you think of the discussion so far?
I don't know. I have a question. I probably just missed it. Did Maurice mention about his thesis?
Not necessarily. He did mention about where his background is from, but not necessarily the thesis itself.
Yeah, I mean, just since he just gave some background about like his PhD thesis, and I just wonder the questions that he asked us in the end. Did he answer to those questions himself, or he's waiting to say more about that later?
It's more of us pretty much coming up with our own conclusions, and then him kind of guiding us as to what he thinks. Since we're pretty much doing not only answering the questions that he provided, but also make our own questions or provocation.
Yeah, okay. So what do you guys think?
Well, we can start with the question that he mentioned about whether or not surveillance has an inheritance in politics that we can't avoid, and that one is a little bit hard to answer because it really depends on what you consider political. Especially with what was talked about in the FAQ or question Q&A. I'm sorry, not the FAQ. About what you call it? Blah, blah, blah. I just lost the train of thought. Sorry. Blah, blah, blah. give me 1 second. But pretty much the politics on whether or not it's for the good of the people or what have you, like giving up certain quote unquote freedoms in order to have more security. Like, at least that's the only aspect I see where there's some politics behind.
Yeah, it's like a double-edged sword, right? So sometimes it can provide you with some advantages, but at the same time, it may hurt you somehow.
Yeah, exactly. It all depends on pretty much going back into a point that EC or Punky did earlier was about consent. Like,
Yeah, but I wonder what's the difference between surveillance and attention or per se, because sometimes when people post on social media, they actually want the attention from others.
right.
But somehow that's related to the consent part you were talking about. So that's kind of like when people post something themselves, it means that they are already willing to share this kind of stuff with others. But surveillance is kind of like, right, it's always there. Hello, guys.
Wait, are you saying the gaze of the other is like some sort of surveillance? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, yes, that's what I'm saying. It's like sometimes we seek the attention from others, but it's quite similar to surveillance somehow. It's just we want others to know what we are how we live our lives somehow. But part of it, it's not like, so that's where the consent part comes from, I guess.
Yes,
Hey,
but yeah, I get it.
1 second. So can we just, a few things I want from the group are 2 questions, 2 provocations for everybody. So we're going to come together as a larger group in 5 minutes or so. It would be good to have 2 questions to ask everybody, 2 provocative statements. Be as provocative as you want, and 2 examples of surveillance, sort of everyday surveillance, things that we might not necessarily think of as surveillance, or interesting forms of surveillance that you know about.
Gotcha.
Cool. And I'll leave you guys to chat.
Is that an and or an or?
Or.
Okay.
Oh, you mean for the 3 things? Ideally, all of them, but do what you can. There's you're not getting marked on this.
Okay, sounds good.
I'll close the rooms in about 5 minutes, okay?
Yeah, we don't have time. Okay.
But what you were talking about earlier, that is probably a really good thing to bring up as to whether or not we can consider social media sharing some type of surveillance. Like I would consider that a provocation of sorts.
I don't think that's kind of the meaning of the surveillance. Like the word surveillance means like you're watching from a top, you're watching from a higher place. So you're not watching as a peer, you're not watching each other.
They're pretty much surveying their, or at least for the people who want attention, they are surveying that aspect of the likes or shares or what have you. So it's not inherently just sorry, I was gonna say the word in Spanish, but surveying is not necessarily just like watching over someone. It can be watching over things like data or actions, what have you. At least that's what I would say.
Well, I think we can also go about social media, how social media is psychologically encouraging you to share more.
Mm-hmm.
So that actually goes into their business model, because the more you share, the more money they make out of you. And it's funny because you are basically being manipulated into sharing more about yourself. You do it with your own free will, if there's such a thing. But this is actually going to fit right into their business model as well.
I think another very important thing is transparency. We as customers of those apps, we are customers of some website, we have the right to know how they use our data. And also we as citizens have the right to know how the government uses our data, what data they have, and how is that data used. And if we should have the right to remove some of the data they have. And all those transparency is not there yet.
Yes, I definitely agree. It's like, it's not like we're gonna have like full control over, the operation of certain corporate platforms or the government, especially. But like we do have the right. I think we do have the right to have some sort of transparency, to know, at least we know, okay, what they're doing in their power to us, So like, like we might not be able to stop what they're doing, but like, at least we know, to what extent, we're being, we are under their surveillance or whatever.
So it comes down to, is the data they collect on you going to be used for what they promise it's only going to be used? Or is it going to be, later used for other purposes? I don't think there's a good way to guarantee that.
I think to guarantee that, we probably need another form of government and another form of company structure, instead of mostly owned by a few people, and those few people control the capital of the company. We probably need another model of the company where say its employee and its customer own the company and have the right to make decisions for the company. If we change the company structure, we probably will have ways to control how our data is collected, how it's used, and also it could address your question on how it will how in the future the data collected on you will be used, because it become not a decision of a few people, a few, say, leader of the company, but rather a decision of all the customers and all the employees.
Besides that, I think also there's a sense of, there's a sense that, the algorithm behind it, or like how things work in general, it's just not, it's not naturally transparent to, to people. It's like, it feels, people feel encased or like overwhelmed, or not overwhelmed, but like, you're trapped in this game, but like you don't know how it works. You have absolutely no idea how it works, and like you have no control over it. And like, it's more, I think it's more than just it's more than just the fact that, how corporations are owned by a few people, how capitalism is a system of hierarchy. There's also, it's, just especially with, I guess with high tech, there's a sense that algorithm controls you, like technology controls you, but you serve it, but like you don't, you just have no idea how it works. With social media, you're encouraged to share those things. You think you're talking to other human beings through social media, but like you're really working for that medium, that platform itself. You generate all those data and so on.
So sorry, go ahead.
I think one thing with current algorithm and the issue raised with the algorithm is if we want to prove the algorithm is biased, then we need to see the algorithm. We need to see the code, but a lot of companies keep their code secret, so you cannot prove it. One thing within the engineering community is we try to open source our code, and we try to publish our code in open platform and let others take a look at the code and see if the code is biased or if there's any bug inside the code. It could be also a good way to make sure the algorithm first is not going to collect more information than it's needed. And also it could be a good way to make sure the algorithm is not biased towards anything.
Well, I guess here
I have different ideas. I mean, why do we need to care about whether the business companies, the tech companies use our data to, to use us just as a medium? Because I mean, like the initial idea of why we use social media is because we want to connect to other people's. It doesn't really matter whether this behavior will result in other actions that the medium platform provided by those tech companies. I mean, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't make a difference if they use our data or not, because our initial purpose was to connect to others. And while tech companies, they provide this service to us, I mean, for me, it's quite fair if they just want to use whatever because we're using their platforms.
Well, I think it's a little bit creepy that Instagram seems to always know what I want to buy at a given moment, right? So if they're trying to make money out of you, they're making this profile on you. They have a data double of you. I don't think it's ethical at all.
Yeah, and it's just like the problem of transparency. There's, we just don't I mean, it's fine they use our data, but we don't know how exactly they use it and what for. Yeah, exactly. Instagram just knows exactly what I want. That's actually, that's it shows they have domination, they have power over us, and we can't do anything about it.
So yeah, okay, this is going to close in 2 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
I think we may need more discussion time.
I think we should have a larger group discussion. If that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can always discuss forever, but at some point it's good to get it going in the bigger group. Is everyone out of their rooms? Yeah, they should be. So I'm interested to hear Jen, yeah?
Yes, so since we haven't really completed our discussion, I just realized that my opinion could be quite provocative, because I just heard back from our team members. Seems like I have different opinions about collecting data, the data collected by the social media. I don't really care they collect my data, to be honest, because I feel like if they can provide information that related to my interests or whatsoever, just, if they know everything about me, it's fine. I don't really, that bother me that much. And they know what I want, and they can give me some, introduction or even more good stuff. I'm totally fine with that. I mean, but it seems like not everyone thinks in the same way. So yeah, I'm just only speak for myself. No offense to others. Yeah.
So one position is don't give a fuck position. I mean, as long as one is providing a service. So this is your specifically talking about surveillance capitalism, or are you talking like on social media, Jen, or are you talking about surveillance within society more generally? You don't mind being surveyed by the government as long as they are providing safety within society?
Maybe, yeah, but I haven't really thought about that, since we were only talking about like social medias backing our smaller group. So I was just express my idea about, yeah, I'm fine with, you know, the tech companies to collect my data, my preference, and just show the products that I'm interested in the future. So for that part, I totally feel okay with that, or as you say, not give a fuck. But other aspect, I haven't really thought about it. So yeah.
These are provocations that find that. So that's one. Olivia?
Yes, so I guess just a question back to Jen. So like, I think it makes sense, like if I give my, if I know that the social media is collecting my data and it's recommending me like feeds I want to read, I think that's more of like a usage of data that you expect. But for example, let's say like, if you use like Ding Ding for Alibaba, and you use, or like whatever social media platform Alibaba owns, and that collects data on like you and who you connect with and your colleagues and your friends. But then because it's like a giant corporation that also owns like Taobao and all like the shopping channels, they can like aggregate all the data and like aggregating the data and use the data in a way that you don't necessarily like would have foreseen. For example, like it might provide recommendation of like products that you have bought to your friends without you knowing it. Would you still feel comfortable in that way? Like when the power of it really becomes more than just focus on you, when it's used in ways that you can foresee, are you still okay with that?
Jen? So for everybody, but I will also ask Jen there because it seems like you're pointing towards Jen. But Yuns, you had your hand up. You want to come in still?
Yeah, I can make a quick comment because I see the question is towards Jen, so I
don't worry.
Okay, so I think Jen and me are in the same smaller group discussion, and when she raised this question, some people say it's scary to see platform guess your preference. It's scary to see, say, Instagram or Facebook knows which product you want to buy. One thing I want to add is, this is one thing it makes people scary, but it's even more scary if the platform manipulates your preference. It manipulates what thing you want to buy. It also could manipulate your political preference. And if the platform can do such things, it's a deterioration to your personal identity.
Yeah, okay. I think several of these questions are also about this thing sort of that Izzy mentioned before, consent, but they're also about transparency and things like that. I guess you want to say something, Izzy, but you can't put your hand up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say that the part of your topic theme was an ethics of care, which is actually a feminist concept, as I understood it. And I think it all comes back to consent. So is it possible that for your data double that all these corporations collected on you and created, is it possible to give consent? And is it possible to kind of surveil the data double from the beginning to the end? I don't think it's possible. So my stance is quite simple: giving a fuck, but 人并乱.
Okay. Louis?
Yes. So I was just gonna say, I think it's the problem with surveillance capitalism, or like corporate surveillance. It's not just we thinking as users of a social media platform or something like that, one of those apps. It's also related to to economic exploitation. I'm thinking of one of those food delivery apps. They use the I don't know about the technical details, but like they use those algorithms, they use these digital technologies to surveil the workers, the delivery drivers, to make sure to accelerate their process of labor, to make sure the time of delivery is shorter and shorter, and like to also sort of to have a full to basically have a mapping of their behavior, of their of it's I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't have data here, but like if you read about it, it's like it's kind of like Taylorist sort of surveillance of the workers. And well, at least in China, they're pushing the workers to very dangerous sort of to very dangerous situations where they have to break traffic rules, where they have to risk their own lives in order to to fulfill the demand of the algorithm, which they have no knowledge of. They don't know how it works. They have absolutely no control over it. So I think so it has real surveillance. It has real life consequences. It could be a matter of life and death. It's not just my privacy being being compromised by Facebook or whatever.
Yeah, and so I'll just say something quickly, then James can come in after me. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't disagree with Jen, but I also or Izzy, but I also think that there needs to be broader transparency throughout these processes, both governmentally and corporate. And I begin to wonder if our first engagement with these corporations is not transparent, how can we sort of believe that anything else is going to be transparent further along the chain? We are starting, our first interaction is in a relationship of secrecy, hiding, and exploitation. And if the basic level is not better, how do we ensure that the higher levels are any better or not in the stack of it all that we were talking about? And yeah, on Louis, yeah, I was doing research with some food delivery drivers as well, and it wasn't easy for them, and it was not easy algorithmically. In that sense, it was also not easy dealing with customers at such a high level. One of my good friends did it for a while, and he quit because a customer refused to sign a package for him because she decided she didn't like the color of the shoes, and she then refused to sign for the package. And if he didn't get the package signed for, he would lose, I believe he got in an argument and he ended up having more than half of his entire month's wages taken from him because of this interaction. And maybe this is it. Also, the exploitation upscales throughout it. James?
Hi. So just talk about the platform. I have another example. So the E says with consent or without consent. Sometimes even you didn't give the consent, the platform like Facebook, they save user data, they collect user data. Even when you delete some feed yourself, they also make a copy there. So the goal of the enterprise is just not to make money. They save this user data even without your permission. So one extreme example is the British company Cambridge Analyst, right? Cambridge Analyst, the lead Analytica, yeah, lead by Steve Bannon. They use a bug in Facebook API. They get the user data illegally, but they use that one to feed fake news to some specific user to manipulate your political view and to impact the election. So that's a very extreme example. So how to handle the user data properly is a very critical thing for current day's political situation. So even Facebook claims that there's not their fault, there's a system bug, but how do they handle user data is another aspect. They didn't handle user data very properly, or use some encryption method. That's all their faults. So this is examples. So this scandal also impact their stock price. They drop a lot, drop about 40% in 2018. So even without people's consent, they did something secretly. That's not good. That's not I think this fall anti the incentive rule for all the enterprise.
Yeah. I guess the question becomes, if you don't have transparency at the initial, at the basic level, how can you? I mean, like, white hackers or something like that. They are going in and trying to fix things. But we could all be the white hat hackers of Facebook, but we are not. There's no transparency, so it becomes difficult for this. This is also, so this is where I think for me personally, the spatial imaginary, but also just thinking spatially anyway. If we consider Facebook as a privately owned space where we congregate to interact, just as many private spaces, there are many public private spaces around us that we as the public are allowed to enter into. But once we enter there, we are beholden to different rules. If we think about it like that, then I think we should think how we have transparency, at minimal levels of transparency in the physical spaces around us. And we should be trying to push for further levels of things. If it's acceptable or unacceptable in physical spaces around us, then why should we not allow it in digital space? Or why should it be different in the digital spaces around us? I'm not saying this is the perfect way to do it, but it is a provocation that pushes the conversation perhaps in a direction that asks for more transparency. So we have Flower, then we have 3. Flower?
So it just occurs to me, I feel like the thinking about data and like online digital space is also, I don't know if it's a good analogy, but it also just makes me think about the government, why we have government. It's like a social contract, and the way we give up some of our rights to the government, and the government like helps us, protects us. It seems like that's what like sort of like Jane's idea, like this data like helps me and makes things convenient for me. So, but I think if you make the analogy of how we give up our power and how much power we decide to give up to the government, I think it's we can borrow a lot of those arguments from how we limited the government's power. And also, like to your point on transparency, that's definitely very important, because then you don't know, like the danger is it's lurking. You don't see it now, but the impact it's unseen. And then it's also like a poem, a very super famous poem. I don't remember the name, but it's like when the Jews, sort of like this, when the Jews were killed, everybody's silent because I'm not a Jew, I don't speak for them. When the the people were killed, I don't stand out because I'm not one of them. And then when I'm in danger, nobody speaks up for me because they are not me. So that's like the same kind of thing. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, the civil contract thing I posted just now is a book about photography. It's a bit complicated, but the person who wrote it, Rationalié, her future book, I think in 2015, released by Verso, has many of the same ideas and is more approachable. In that, she's talking about how you can consent to something that you do not understand. And she considers, some of you may have seen I think if you search on Google for National Geographic Afghan girl, I think that's what it is. Afghan girl. Yeah. If you search for National Geographic Afghan girl, you find a picture of a girl taken in the 1980s that was extremely famous. And it was, I think it was linked to the war, the Cold War occurring in Afghan through Russia and the US. But this kid didn't really know what a camera was. She didn't know what a photograph was. She only saw this photograph of her 30 years after it had been taken because the photographer was paid to track the person down and see what happened to the person. In this situation, Rationalié considers it rape. It is tantamount to rape of this child, of this person, really. It's impossible, even if that kid said, you can do this, that kid didn't know what's going to happen to the photograph. The kid doesn't know what National Geographic is. The kid doesn't know the power of the photo or who the audience they are speaking to is. And I think through this, we need to really consider more broadly notions of consent. And can we really consent to things when the majority of the population doesn't understand the technology and the implications of the technology in quite basic ways? I think consent is almost broken at the moment for these things. 3?
Yeah, I just wanted to give an example about like for people who are saying like, I don't care about how they use the data. So let's say WeChat added a feature called voice assistant, and you got to use WeChat, right? Like you have your friends are on WeChat, your family is on WeChat, you have to use WeChat. So you have to enable this voice assistant, and the voice assistant will be triggered by some word. And someday you were like having a fight with a partner of you, and the voice assistant get triggered, and like the conversation is recorded by WeChat and sent to somewhere. And basically the engineer decided like we need some human input to this data, or to transcribe it, or to figure out whatever it is. And so they send the audio clip to a contractor. And so the contractor sent it to another contractor, which is perfectly legal. And it happens that one of the contractor is like a 大叔 living upstairs. Okay, so now the 大叔 knows like you're having a big fight with your boyfriend or girlfriend. And then the 大叔 starts to doing some weird thing or following you or something else, right? Would you be comfortable with that? Do you think it's like the correct use of data? Or would you say you have already consented Tencent to use the data in this way? Yeah, that's my question or example.
People are really going for Jen. Well, no, not going for Jen. I think people want Jen's response at some point. Olivia?
I think Jen has dropped. Anyways, I was just wanting to comment on the previous comment that you made of I agree that there is more of a gap to access or barrier to access or knowledge with a lot of the technologies we have. And I think that can prevent a lot of people from giving proper consent, even though it might be possible in some ways. So I guess like that really raised an interesting question. Is like, what is the right way then to regulate that form of data collection or surveillance? And is the answer to that better education overall, which is I don't know, always an aspiration but hard to achieve, or legislation, which is basically like entrusting some other higher authority to regulate another authority that you already can control, which is a very interesting question, I guess. It's like using the power of surveillance or the power of authority against power of surveillance. But I feel like that is the approach that is more like realistic nowadays. It's like to make sure that legislation can catch up with that.
I'm pro legislation. Louis?
Yes, I was just gonna say two things. So I think with the problem with consent, there's also a second aspect to to the problem of like consenting to terms of a certain tech company. There's a sense that you're expected to consent. You're given a free choice. You can consent or not, but we all know that you have to consent or you're locked out of that service. Platforms, apps like WeChat, or like I don't know about like WeChat or Facebook. Like WeChat would be basically an essential service in China. You can't really not use it. Like if you go to work, you need WeChat. If you want to communicate with your friends, your people elsewhere, you have to use it. It's just like it's an essential service. It's part of the life. It's part of the real life. It's not just some sort of virtual space that you can just simply quit, opt out. So in that sense, you might be given a free choice when you download the app, but you really don't have that choice. And then the second point would be there's this Izzy, not Izzy, it was Jen. Jen was saying, I don't care about they collecting my data, for seemingly benevolent purposes, pinpointing my personal interests or whatever. But that's what they tell you. That's what we know. But I bet there are things we do. We simply don't know. What they're gonna, because they have the data. They're gonna do whatever they want, and like, we have no knowledge of that. And like, especially some of those purposes might be much more problematic and like beyond our sort of common sense. And then especially the intersection with state power, with state surveillance, and we know that's not just not just in China. Google is also companies like Google also share data without your knowledge, without your consent, with maybe states intelligence agencies, and that might be used against you. So it's much more problematic than just, I think, personal preferences, given how state power is merging with sort of, in a sense, merging with those tech platforms.
Yeah. And if we look at any of the Edward Snowden Five Eyes things, we learn the limits of these things and how this relationship works. And Apple in China as well, with Apple's conduct in China versus Apple's conduct in the US is a very interesting comparison of the state corporate relationship. Jen?
Yes, I've heard a lot of questions towards me, and yeah, I'm not gone. I've been here the whole time, and I just want to say that some of you really made some like very great examples of the situation that may happen in a very bad way. For example, like if I had an argument with my partner and like accidentally recorded by apps and posted everywhere. But even if I don't really have these functions on my phone, for example, I just had a fight with my apartment in my apartment, and then someone else just passed by and heard about this fight, and probably they will do some shit things as well. I mean, how could you really protect your privacy from all these environments? In the end, is about a personal mindset, or a personal acceptance towards how much of your life is being observed or captured by others, and how much could you live with it. I mean, it's just we cannot really live in a vacuum environment, no one is near you or by you or you really know you. Even you walking on the street, someone probably taking pictures of you secretly without your consent or notice. So it's just a matter of whether you can live with this reality. And for me, I feel I probably couldn't do that in the past, but now I can. I mean, it's just a matter of acceptance.
Yeah. Min?
It's because of what I said, you.
No, I'm just joking. Min, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I did want to comment. So I have some comments about your analogy of space, this physical space and virtual space. I found that was very interesting and it was very useful for thinking about things. So one thought I have from that is, I was thinking maybe one problem of all the social media platforms are, one problem of that is monopoly. So, because they have so much power and you didn't have a form of consent because all your friends are there, and it's kind of becoming a public space because of their monopoly power. So I was thinking versus I guess a public square, a public park versus a restaurant. If you have many restaurants to go to, and if one restaurant, okay, you have to, every restaurant, I guess every restaurant will have some kind of special forms. They could impose special rules for their customers to conform. Maybe not too extreme, but they could have some special rules, you have to wear business casual, something like that. But it's okay if you don't go to one restaurant because you can go to many other restaurants. But for social media platforms, because we didn't have that much choice, and it's maybe one that's one of the problem.
I agree, and that you talked about parks too. You were sort of getting to a comparison there. I find it, just going through these analogies, if we want, we don't have to consider it as space. I sort of do, but thinking through a park, I'm not comfortable often with things that were formerly public parks becoming private land and private parks. And it does make me feel that I'm probably not so I don't know if it's good that so much of our digital space is in private hands. And where are the public spaces where is the space where we don't have to worry about our data being harvested and sold for profit? It feels perhaps that there needs to be more public-owned space, but how do we develop this? And yeah, we've gone very spatial here, but one would hope that if there was more publicly owned space, it would operate under different regimes of surveillance, capital extraction, etc. And that might be better. Yun?
I want to address a point Jane mentioned before. I think she's mentioning the data could be leaked to through a company, or it could be someone maliciously want that data and say just record her argument with her partner. But one point I want to make is the reason we have law is not to make sure no one breaks the law. It's just impossible to do it. But the reason we have some of the law is we want to make the action of breaking the law harder. So even someone could go pass by where you live and record audios of your everyday life. It's much harder than you use some app and the app just get your data and spread the data around. So so in that sense, it still could help a lot if we have some law to regulate those data, how data is collected and how data is used.
Yeah, and I guess if we go back to notions of surveillance and visibility, the following of you around and recording of you by an individual is often a visible action. You will see somebody walking behind you with a camera, for instance. It's not always visible. There are ways of working around that, of course, but there are sort of standards and ideas around visibility there, which probably aren't being followed through in our current digital spatial environments or the current platforms that we're using. So it's almost 9 p.m. for me now. I think that I'm gonna have to we might have to sort of end it here. I'm happy to, so in the chat, I just put my email address and my Twitter, and some of you may have seen me on Weixin in the groups. I'm always happy to engage in discussions and chat about things if anybody's interested. Some of the things that we talked about, like I only wrote this discussion very quickly earlier, so it's not the most coherent thing I've ever written or presented, but I'm happy to have a more thought through discussion on any of these points with people if they want to in the future. Sometimes these things are just, like I said, provocations. They're about pushing things a bit further to see what happens, and it's important to maybe break out of the boxes that we're currently thinking in. So I'm always happy to engage in that with people. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for all your bullshit talking, Carwyn. Really good. That's some really good bullshit.
Top bullshit, top bullshit.
By the way, Carwyn, would you mind if we have 10 minutes to just have a post-mortem discussion just for the leadership group and you?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks.